Hello and welcome to episode 35 of The Garden Log. I am Ben Dark and I am a gardener, and I'm also a podcast host and your guide to what I've been doing in the garden this week. We are talking about plants today, and we're talking about zinnias and plumbagos and other exotic eye-catching things, talking about grasses, some miscanthus and some muhlenbergia, and also talking about some scabiosa. And if that sounded like a lot of plant names in rapid succession, none of which create a strong mental picture for you, then fear not. I had some correspondence this week. All correspondence is welcome. And this person was saying something that I've heard before. They were saying that they enjoy the podcast, but that sometimes it's hard to picture what I'm talking about. I reel off the names of plants as if they were there, available and ready to the imagination of every listener. But of course we are all at different stages of our gardening journey. And when I talk about a zinnia, as if everyone knows what a zinnia is, then there will always be people saying, hang on, I can't see that. You're making all these comments about how wonderfully clashing it is. I don't know what it clashes with. I have no idea what the colour of the thing is. And that's very true. So this person reminded me of that and asked if I could put out some more visual content to accompany the oral meanderings. I'm going to endeavour to do that. So this podcast will go out, and then a few days later I'm going to make a post on Instagram with some of the images of the plants that I've been talking about this time round. Anyway, it was a hot week. It was a hard week. It was a week of actual work. I had to earn my money. One day I will be paid for daydreaming, but that day is not yet here. A quick update before we get on to my professional doings about my own garden. The lawn is dormant and waiting for rain. It will come back. It is not dead. The apple tree is dead. It is certainly dead. We can have no doubt about it now. That apple tree is dead. Unfortunately, it is the thing that holds up the washing line. So I've decided that I'm going to leave it and I'm going to grow things up it. And I'm going to grow up it principally a Peleostegia viburnioides. That is an evergreen climbing plant with lovely white flowers around about this time of year. That is mid-July, late July, for those of you listening in the future. I will take a picture of that and put it alongside the others on my Instagram account, which is Gardener Dark. Enough of that, let's talk about the week in gardening. Welcome to the week in gardening. This was the week of the big garden party, and as such it was a week of primping and preening, both for myself, I do like a good preen, and for the vegetable matter within the garden, which can always do with a primp. I started on Monday with a sort of tour of inspection, a surprise audit. I imagined myself as some sort of justice minister turning up to take a tour round one of the prisons unannounced and see how many contraband televisions and illegal drugs and sex workers had found themselves into the compound somehow and chase them all away. In this case, though, I was not chasing away smuggled luxuries. I was chasing away piles of pots and bits of wood that had at some stage been considered useful enough to be stacked somewhere semi-out of the way. And most of these things wouldn't have been seen by guests, but it's always a good piece of practice to get rid of them anyway, because you never know when amorous couples are going to go wandering through the groves, or when nosy neighbours are going to just poke themselves into bits of the place where they're not wanted. And also it's good horticulture. I always fancy being one of those late Victorian, early Edwardian, fist of steel head gardeners who takes it as a point of pride that the scuzzy area behind the stove in his third best greenhouse is just as clean as the stone lions on the terrace. And that's the kind of person I would like to be. It goes completely against my nature. I am by nature disordered. I am chaos personified, and I need to fight that. And so I took a tour as if I were a stranger and made a list of all of the things that needed to be tidied. Things like gravel piles that become uneven, bits that needed raking, all of those boring things that I could fade into the other horticultural tasks of the week to make sure that the garden looked at its very sumptuous best. And I was rewarded for this on Tuesday with some heavy cloud cover to finish the day on. What a relief to have the great burning orb off the back of my neck just for a second. It's nice to see the garden in the shade. It's a very different character to the place. You forget how subtle the tones of the greens can be when they've been washed out by that bright glare for weeks and months on end. So I took a stroll around just soaking up the atmosphere. I ditched my Minister of Justice hat and put on my moody poet hat and staggered around thinking how apt all of it were. It was a good start to the week to do these tedious tidying jobs nice and early. It's sometimes unpleasant to admit it, even to oneself, but a great deal of being a professional gardener is essentially being an outdoor cleaner. And I got my outdoor cleaning out of the way, so the rest of the week could be dedicated to plants. Last week I talked a lot about a yellowing ceanothus, a huge great thing, ugly as sin and yellow as a jaundiced alcoholic, and how I was going to try and get rid of it in the autumn, but I needed a solution to screen it for the party. And in the end I settled on a grassy solution. I decided to go for fine fronds of grassy foliage in various heights from about 2 foot to 5 foot across a stretch of the front of the border to add air and light and joy and levity and youth to an area that was looking distinctly geriatric and faded. As I mentioned, that the ceanothus will come out, but it wasn't time to do it in the week before the garden party. It's a huge, great thing, and the roots are going to be sufficient that lots of other plants will have to be dug up and moved around and put into temporary accommodation while I smear mud over everything. So instead, I moved a poor collateral shrub. I moved a little euonymus. Well, it wasn't little, it was quite a big spreading euonymus, and it was very ugly in its own right. It was one of those Euonymus fortunei, the probably emerald gold, which is an awful spelling and not a great plant for a standout herbaceous border. It is very yellow. It's one of those variegated yellow euonymuses that you might see quite often in a car park. And it is bright and tough and a perfect plant for some places, just not this one. So I pulled that out along with a few other bits and pieces of dark, heavy material, some ajuga and a bit of the acanthus that grows wherever it wants in that sort of area. And suddenly I had a big stretch. I had 8, 9, 10 foot of clear ground at the front of this prime herbaceous border. And the grasses I chose to fit it, I've planted dents. They'll have to be moved apart because they're all quite big plants in their own right. But I was doing a bit of instant gardening, a bit of the old Chelsea Flower Show magic. And I put in some Miscanthus sinensis at the back. I put in Miscanthus sinensis Morning Light. And if anyone is a fan of grasses, they will probably have used Miscanthus sinensis Morning Light. It's a tool, well, not tool for Miscanthus, but tool for grass generally, probably about 5 or 6 foot in total at its height. It's a tall grass with a very faint variegation, delightful variegation actually. The midrib of the very fine blade is silver, but you wouldn't notice it from a distance. It's the opposite of that euonymus. It doesn't look overtly variegated. It just looks silvery and hazy. And I put in probably put in 5 of those standing almost under the canopy of the ceanothus to feather the edge of it. And then in front of those, I put in some grass that I have never used before, and that is Muhlenbergia. And the one I used was a Muhlenbergia revachonii undaunted, which is, if anything is to be believed in the world of plant labels and of horticulture, going to be absolutely beautiful. It's a very, very fine-leaved grass, so it brings the light and airiness that I needed for that part of the border. And the flowers, which aren't out yet, look like they're going to be this wonderful puff of reddish pink above the clump of grass, almost like the flowers on one of those cotinus, one of the smoke bushes, the purple forms. Oh, it looks like someone has gone along in the border and then stepped on a big, ripe puffball mushroom, and all the spores have gone poof into the air in a wafty kind of manner. But that's the problem with looking at photographs of grass on the internet, because all grasses look brilliant photographed at dawn with low sunbeams streaming through them. It's from Texas, the Muhlenbergia, I found out, which is quite pleasing, having the Texan grass and the Japanese grass rubbing shoulders in there. And then I dotted it through the front just for a bit of flower, because lots of people still like flowers in the herbaceous borders, me being one of them. I dotted through Scabiosa vivid violet, which is one of those pincushion flowers. I've used it quite a few times before. It's small. It flowers at about a foot and a half. Flowers for absolutely ages. It is a violet sort of colour. That will form a small clump. It's quite disease resistant. It's a good little plant. I'll get a picture of that up onto the Instagram at some point next week. The overall effect is good. It's still a bit piecemeal. The border does not have a coherence to it. It's one of the borders that I've inherited, full of sentimental plants and old things. I think the excuse of taking out the old ceanothus will allow me to rationalise it and actually get the border to gel with itself a little bit more. I'll keep all of the grasses in the border somewhere, but they'll probably be spaced out a bit more and dotted around. So all of that was accomplished upon Wednesday. I worked from boards on the lawn. I pulled over some big sheets of plyboard and did all of my digging and planting from there, which meant that the grass was not damaged, and it was very easy to cart away all of the mud and labels and plants with me when I left. So I felt very proud of myself for that. The old Edwardian gardener looking over my shoulder constantly would have been proud as well, no doubt. On Thursday, I went back to the area of the garden where I've been planting the roses. That wisteria bed I've talked about, with the standard wisteria and the lovely roses underneath, and then the nepeta, all of those classic English garden stuff. And that area has a lot of deer, huge amount of deer, and I've been very cocky so far because they hadn't been too much of a problem. I'd been planting lots of silver-leaved things which deer don't tend to eat, the nepetas and the lavenders. But I found that those Kew Garden roses that I'd planted, and that I'd been so pleased about, I was boasting about them just 2 weeks ago, saying they seem incredibly pest resistant. There's no black spot. No one's been eating them at all. Well, the deer found them and they came and ate them. They've done that deer thing where they get the whole group of leaves in their mouths and then suck it backwards, taking off all the leaflets and leaving that central leaf rib down the middle, just to show they've been there. They've also eaten the leaves, quite a few of the leaves, of some Japanese anemones that I had growing in the shade of some apple trees. They've come along and put their little sharp teeth just on the underside of those big leaves and nipped them off, so that I have these spiky plants, all with just one long leaf stem with nothing on the end of it. It's quite irritating, but that is the way of the world, the way of being a gardener. I now know that when deer get hungry enough, they will eat anemones, and they will eat Rosa Kew Gardens. After that, I got stuck in one of those cascades of jobs. I think you must have them in every career in the world, where you start one thing, you pick up a watering can to go and water a wilting plant, and on the way past you notice a leak in a hose pipe, and so you go and get the secateurs to snip off a section of that and reconnect it, and then in the shed you notice that a door is off the hinges, and you fix that back on, and then while you've done that you come back out and see that the other plant next to the first one you watered has started wilting, so you go back to get the watering can, and then you realise that actually you might as well feed the plants while you've got the can out, so you go to get the fertilizer but you've run out of that, so you put in an order with the plant suppliers and etc, and before you know it, the end of the day has come and you've achieved a great amount and at the same time achieved nothing, which I suppose is a good metaphor for being a gardener and the gardening calendar, be it daily, weekly, monthly, yearly or lifelong. It was Thursday, I did gardening, and then moved on to Friday, which was the big day of preparation for the party. I hired in an extra hand, someone else to help us, and he's very, very good at edges and neatness, and has a radar eye for seeing things out of their place, so they could get on with doing all of that stuff. And I redid pots around the terrace and big lead planters and things. I went for an outrageous planting scheme. I went for orange and blue. There is this phrase, which I've talked about before, when doing hanging baskets, that you need plants to thrill, fill and spill. And as a plant to thrill, that is the spike of flowers to rise above it, I chose a plumbago, one of those blue vines with masses and masses of forget-me-not blue flowers, and I kept that on a bamboo frame so it's going to rise up high, and then around that a clump of bright orange zinnias. And I love zinnias because they have buds, almost like those cornflower buds that are beautiful in their own right. They have scales on them, almost like something you'd see on an Art Deco dress, a sequined dress or something like that. They're beautiful, absolutely beautiful. When they open into outrageous zinnia orange, which is great. And then for the lower portion, I used Dichondra silver fools, that classic cascading silver leaf plant that looks brilliant when you water it because it collects beads of water. And I planted that quite close to the base of the zinnias, and then spread the leaves out horizontally across the top of the soil and then down the edge. So it almost looks like the zinnias and the plumbagos are rising from a boiling pool of dry ice, like the outrageously camp creature from the Black Lagoon. I'll put a picture of that pot up on Instagram as well. It really is quite something. And while I did that, the guys had done an absolutely fantastic job in getting all of the tasks done that make a garden look at its very best. The going round and getting the edges perfectly straight, doing 2 cuts with the roller mower on the croquet lawn, 2 diagonal cuts, so you get a checkerboard effect. Blowing all of the leaves and crisped up drought relics of insects and petals from the terraces and the steps and the pathways. And I left the garden as if it were part of that fully servanted, opulent era of the Edwardian age, rather than the modern era when gardeners tend to leave swigging a beer and jumping into their cars to go and do podcasts at home. I doffed my cap and shuffled out. I did go to the garden party on Saturday, and I am very pleased to report that, of course, no one noticed any of this stuff, but they all had a very good time. And that was it. Another week gone, floated away like a dried leaf in the blast of a fully petrol-driven leaf blower. Isn't it sad that we only have 52 of these weeks a year? There's another one next week, and you'll hear all about it. Until then, let's see if we've got any recommendations. So, as we race towards August, far too quickly for my liking, I think we can now acknowledge that it is the start of foraging season, which is very exciting. It's the start of making lots of teeth-rotting sweet things from the bounty of the hedgerows. Some alcoholic things too, probably. I've started foraging greengages already, and I love greengages. Oh my goodness, how I love them. They're so sweet and small and yellow, and the best thing about them is that they're so small and light that when they fall off the tree, unlike other members of the plum family or the apple or the pear family even, they don't damage themselves. They land on the pavement completely intact and ripe. So if you're walking along some house-lined street and someone's greengage tree is dripping over the wall onto the pavement below, you can gather 20, 30 or 40 of them and take them home and eat them, or make them into some sort of preserve, or make them into a compote, or just have them as your little greengage friends until they go off. I did a walk a couple of weeks ago. It's part of the Green Chain Walk in southeast London, and found some really, really good greengage trees in the early stages of their harvest then. So now go out and catch them before they all go over. It's also the mulberry season, and I came across this website called locations.sprouting.org, and the website is titled International Plant Location Data. Though international is somewhat off, it seems mostly location data of fruit trees in Bristol and London. And on here I found the listing of a black mulberry in a park just down the road from me in Camberwell called Myatt's Park. And so, taking the advice of this website, I cycled off there and located the tree. Black mulberries at this time of year, particularly in this time of drought, present a rather disconcerting sight because the ground is so pale and dry and stained in the carcasses of the mulberry, which is the world's most juicy fruit. And it looks like a pride of lions have cornered some poor wildebeest or antelope, and there devoured it beneath the mulberry tree, so gore-covered is the ground below. I was mainly testing out this map to see if it would work as a recommendation, but as a side effect, I did eat quite a few mulberries and came home with my shirt, fingers, teeth and lips stained bright and bloody mulberry red. I've been trying to find other resources because there must be other public-spirited people who are listing the fruit trees of the towns and cities of Great Britain. I found one called fruitcity.co.uk, which is again London-focused, but there aren't that many listings on it, and I don't think it's been updated since 2011. But still, on there you can find some extra trees, mainly apples and pears. There's no point looking for any cherry trees on there because no one's going to eat any of the cherries. The birds will get them all, and they'll be far too high up. It's very frustrating foraging in London generally. Some years there is an explosion in popularity for sloe gin for some reason, and you can't go near a sloe bush without a stepladder because everyone has plucked everything up to the height of 8 foot. Anyway, go and have a look at what fruit you can find for free near you. Even if you have your own extensive orchards, it's nice getting something for free. And if you find any other resources, then please do let me know. Until then, enjoy the greengages, enjoy the mulberries, and let's all look forward to pears, apples, figs, plums, bullaces, sloes, blackberries, and everything else there is to come. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of The Garden Log. I had a wonderful time recording it. I've been sipping tea and looking out of the window occasionally. There's nothing out of the window. I have a window onto a small internal courtyard. I really don't know what it is doing there, this courtyard in my house. It's not really actually a courtyard. The estate agents described it as such, but really I think it's an area that we're contractually obliged to leave free of building due to some waste pipes into which a doorway has been put. Which makes it a courtyard garden, I suppose. And I think I'm going to turn it next year into a wonderful tropical basin. It's going to be full of fronds and ferny things and banana-y things. Until now, it is bare. There's an aspidistra sitting next to it. A nice, classic, dark green aspidistra. Nothing else. Anyway, that's enough of my recording studio. It was wonderful speaking to you all, as it always is. Remember that I do enjoy hearing from you. You can email me at thegardenlogpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Ben's Garden, that's right, yes. And you can follow me on Instagram at GardenerDark, where I will be putting some pictures up next week, including of the wonderful plumbago and zinnia pots, and anything else I can find. The next episode, episode 35, I'm sure will be a particularly good one because I've scheduled the hay cut in the meadow. And the hay cut is a very arduous job involving sweat and cursing and blood and wasp stings normally. And it looks like it might well be done on some of the hottest days of the year. So that will be a very fun episode. Until then, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy whatever tasks you're up to this week, gardening or non-gardening. Thank you and goodbye.